what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
This podcast is sponsored by the 2019 Footcandle Film Festival. This year's film festival will be held September 27th through 29th in Hickory, North Carolina. Learn more by visiting footcandlefilmfestival.com.
Footcandle Films. Film news and reviews from two guys who really like movies.
This episode is brought to you by the Footcandle Film Society. For a schedule of upcoming screenings and membership information, visit the Society's website at www.footcandle.org.
Hello and welcome to Footcandle Films on themesh.tv. My name is Alan Jackson. I am the co-director and co-founder of the Footcandle Film Society and Footcandle Film Festival. With me is the other co in that co-title, Chris Fry, also co-director, co-founder, Footcandle Film Society, Footcandle Film Festival. Chris Fry, how are you doing?
Chris Fry is doing well, as is Chris Fry.
Good to have you here. As always, we love our time when we get together to talk through some movies and reviews and news items. And today's episode is no exception. This is Footcandle Films on themesh.tv, where we review some recent films. We talk about some upcoming film projects that we've been made aware of. And then we always end the show with a recommendation of a film we think you ought to check out, maybe worth seeing, either something online or something you can find fairly easily that you may have missed or overlooked or just needed to have refreshed in front of you. So today's episode, Chris, we've got two films that we'll be reviewing. One is the latest film from Jordan Peele, his second feature film. It is titled Us. And then we'll be doing a review of the documentary by director Peter Jackson, They Shall Not Grow Old, the World War I documentary that he's recently put out. So we're going to talk about those two films. We'll do some news items after the break, and then we'll end up the show with our recommendations. That is our game plan. Chris, are you ready to get started?
Yes. Don't pay any attention to the golden pair of scissors I have.
Oh, I just now noticed that. Huh.
There's a family in our driveway.
It's probably the neighbors. But y'all scared of a family? Hi, can I help you?
Zora, put your shoes on.
If you want to get crazy, we can get crazy. You people.
It's us.
Jordan Peele, originally known for his work with Mad TV and the Key and Peele comedy series, made his film directorial debut in 2017 with Get Out, for which he was nominated for 3 Academy Awards and actually walked away with Best Original Screenplay Oscar. So that was a win for him.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
With Us, Peele returns to the big screen, telling the story of Adelaide, played by Lupita Nyong'o, who, while vacationing at the beach, encounters a set of doppelgangers that begin terrorizing her family. With his first film, Get Out, some audience members were confused when Peele, who they had associated so closely with comedy, seemed to decide to blend comedy and horror genres together. Afterwards, reportedly distressed with the labeling of Get Out as a comedic horror film, Peele said, okay, I think I'm going to try something a little different. And with Us, maybe he seems to have distanced himself a little bit from comedic elements. I don't know. What's your feeling on that, Alan? And does the apparent commitment to a single genre affect your enjoyment, if at all, of Us?
The movie still has some comedic elements to it. And there's actually some elements that, it's going to be really difficult to talk about this film without spoiling, but I'm going to be very broad and general as best I can.
Okay, fair enough.
There are enough moments, even with the commentary, that you could almost argue is happening throughout the film that has some elements of comedy to it. But I will definitely say this is less comedic than Get Out.
Okay.
And I also think it was scarier.
Okay.
And more thrilling.
So if he was trying to distance himself a little bit from
I think he's inching away. He didn't run completely far away from it, but he did step away a little bit from it.
Sure.
I'm still thinking there are some moments, especially within the family dynamics and even the relationship between Adelaide, the played by Nyong'o, and then Winston Duke playing her husband.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough funny moments between them and dialogue, especially with the husband himself. He gets to play kind of comic relief for a good part of the film. So there's still comedy. There's still some moments where they take a very horrific scene and still add a little bit of a light touch to it. But it's definitely further away from that comedy horror label than Get Out was. I will say that I very much liked this film.
Okay.
I really liked the first 75% of the film. So we can talk, maybe find a way to talk about what I had some issues with the final 25%. It did not cause me to walk away saying I did not like the film. Just I went from a love down to a really like by the time the film had ended.
Okay.
But I will say I'll talk through some things I really liked about it, and I'd like to hear your likes and thoughts as well. I felt like this was an extremely well-crafted thriller/horror movie. Taking the elements that we know as a thriller, taking the elements we know as a horror movie, and really crafting them nicely.
Okay.
I'm going to call out just kind of a moment in the film or a sequence, tension building and ratcheting up the fear when we have an initial home invasion scene fairly early in the film. Which is shown
in the trailer, so you're not.
It is, and
anything.
I'm not going to go into much description of what happens in it, but just the build up to it, the tension that we have within the family, the layout of the geographical space around the family to see what they're surrounded by.
Sure.
All that extremely well done. And then there's a kind of a little bit closer to a middle section where there is a pretty violent encounters between different people, and even how all that was handled was really well crafted as well, and very exciting and kind of tense to watch as well. So all of that building, I thought was a really great thriller horror film.
Okay.
And I think all the acting is solid. I will say Lupita Nyong'o, she's getting a lot of acclaim for this film, and I think it's well deserved. Okay. She plays two roles, and without going into any detail about those two roles too much more than we have to, there's a reason why she plays them the way she does, and there's even some blending of roles to some degree, I will say, as far as acting goes.
Sure.
That has to happen, and it works. Her performance really, really works. And I will say too, I just generally liked the overall concept of the film. This whole concept of the doppelgangers, I thought was a really ingenious thing to play with. How they choose to play with it late in the film is more my questions or some misgivings I've got with the film. But I like the concept as a whole. So overall, yes, I'm very high on the film. I don't know if we're going to be able to go into spoiler time maybe a little bit later, Chris. I don't know what your thoughts are, but again, I have a hard time saying anything else at this point if we can't spoil it. So
sure.
let me toss it over to you and see what you can do on a very high level as well, and then we may throw back the curtain and talk a little bit more about it.
Okay. Well, like you, I was impressed with Lupita Nyong'o, her acting, and she is playing kind of a dual role, and actually, the father and the two kids, they also are credited with playing their doppelgangers as well. So it's like everybody is playing themselves and also playing this, doppelganger version. So that must have been, really crazy on set to have to keep all that separate.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
And it's not the first time something like that's been done before, but just still, I think the number of people playing dual roles.
To have the whole family, right. You have a combination of adults and children. And
right.
I think I'm sure it was a challenge.
Yeah. So I admired that. I thought it was, really effective. Something that I didn't really notice from Get Out, probably because it's set modern day and doesn't do a jump back time period, which this movie does. It starts back in the 80s and then comes forward to present day. The attention to production design as far as, and I didn't find it like some people have complained, the movie we talked about on last podcast, Captain Marvel, how there was like a blockbuster and stuff like that. And they felt like it was all just window dressing without really kind of deeper meaning or kind of really... It was just kind of kitsch value, I guess, even though the story was set back in the 90s. But With this, I feel like the opening shot shows a TV, and it's obviously an old TV, and there are VHS tapes all around it, and just kind of the little details that were picked out in that, and they come back and have ramifications in the film. Everything just seemed to be very intentional, almost like a Wes Anderson horror movie in some aspects, where things just seem to be very, very well scripted, very planned out, and very methodical. And I didn't really recognize that happening, and maybe it did in Get Out, although I've seen it, a couple of times, and I didn't really pick up on that as much as I did just with one single viewing of Us, how certain things are introduced and they come back around. I feel like everything is done for a specific reason, and it all has payoff. Some of that we cannot mention because of spoilers, but in some of the ways, some of the things that happen at the end of the film, at first I was kind of like, I don't really... And then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, no, that totally makes sense. So, and I think I'd be interested to hear about your misgivings with the final 25%, because I think originally I felt a little misgivings, but then the more I thought about it, I was like, nope, that's amazing.
Yeah,
so I don't know. We'll have to.
I can actually address my concerns without spoiling, I think, in a very general way.
I'll say that another highlight for me was the score.
Oh yeah,
and I thought it was very effective. And you hear tidbits of it in the trailer, the little, plucking of the violin strings or cello strings or whatever. It's just very, it sets you on edge, and they do a good job of bringing that back around in the film as well. Lupita Nyong'o's character, when she's young, takes up ballet to try to repress kind of some trauma that happened to her. And then that juxtaposition with ballet, which can have classical music and strings being used, but when you hear that music with the ballet, it just becomes very eerie and disconcerting. It's just, there again, just little attention to details.
It's the whole crafting of it. And the crafting is just really strong.
Really paid off.
The guy's talented in putting together a tense, scary movie. Well, and I do feel like there were genuine scary moments in that first 30, 45 minutes. I mean, I felt like, I think definitely in the first half of the film, it was the whole initial home invasion, the whole initial meeting of the doppelgangers was very, very intense. So, yeah.
I think something else that I appreciated about Us was that it seemed to have a lot on its mind, whereas, Get Out had the theme of racism but it seems like you kind of knew going in to Get Out what you were kind of going to get. And that's how I felt like at the end of it. I was like, it was an okay movie. It did have some funny parts. It was scary, but I kind of knew what I guess it had been spoiled just because I kind of knew what was going to go on. Whereas with Us, I didn't really know. I figured it would be obviously some horror, but the layers of what was going on in this movie impressed me a lot more because, it does talk about race, but it also talks about class. It talks about treatment of homeless people. I don't know. And it has, there's some stuff in there.
Can I offer something that may be a little on the controversial side? But
sure.
So I've read a lot of people talking about this film and saying, it's just like kind of what you just alluded to, a lot of deeper meanings, a lot of other layers of things added onto it. And I get all that. And it could have to do with all those things, but does it have to? I mean, does the movie stand on its own as just a pure form of like storytelling?
Well, that's what makes it genius.
And I think
that it doesn't.
That's my thing. Is that I almost think I'm looking at it as just purely tell me a story, and is it an entertaining story that I want to follow?
Right.
Without having to think of is this talking about our caste system in society? Is this talking about homelessness? Is this talking about race? I don't know. Maybe it is talking about all those things. Maybe
if you say it's not, then I don't see what you think the movie's about. That's so disingenuous.
Yes, it could, but does it have to? I mean, does it have to be viewed in that lens? I guess it's just.
I mean, you can I almost feel like I think it's like a zombie movie, but that's not. I mean,
I almost feel like there's so many people kind of falling over trying to read so much into meanings of stuff with this film. But what I like about it is the fact that you didn't have to build any of that stuff in. It actually works as a form of entertainment without having to go down that path and having to read more into it on that.
It's the same. I mean, I can hear that, but I think the intentionality of reading stuff in there, I think is very, very, very clear. If for no other reason, there's a there's a Bible verse that is thrown out there at the beginning. And immediately when I saw it, I was like, I was like, I don't recognize, not that I, am a Bible scholar, but I was like, that's kind of weird. And it comes back around and it's shown at the end. Oh yeah. And if you read it, there's definitely a reason for it. So that's the thing, is like, and you don't have to care about that. You don't have to care about, was there really something called Hands Across America? And what was the point of Hands Across America? You don't have to care about that. No, you can go into it and just be like, oh yeah, this is a thing. It's a horror movie and things happen and, it's against a family and can they bond together and survive or whatever? Sure. You can absolutely see it at that surface level. Right. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think, you can dig into meanings of the Star Wars franchise and about how that's telling, age-old tales about family and all that, the dynamics. You can read into, that's criticism at its base level, is trying to see what things are based on and what it means and take meanings away. But I feel like if you don't think that Jordan Peele put these things in there on purpose, I think that's surprising. I would be surprising if you felt that way.
It's not that I don't feel that way. I think it's because my issues with the final 25% rely on, if that's truly the themes that he is trying to work in there, I think that's where things start to fall apart for me.
Without spoiling anything, I totally disagree. Okay. And it's nature versus nurture. And I'll leave it at that. And I cannot say any more.
And I get that. Actually, that is the theme I would say, but that doesn't go into race and politics and homelessness and other social issues, I guess is what I'm kind of saying, that I think people are trying to feed into this. I definitely see the nature versus nurture. That's the one big theme that totally I got when I came away from it. It's like, oh yeah, it's all about that. Is it about these other deeper, more social-driven issues that I seem to be reading a lot of reviewers are trying to weave into it? Yeah, it can be. And if Jordan Peele wanted that to be about that, he certainly put in enough hints to show that. But that's not the theme I walked away with. The theme I walked away with was what you just said, nature versus nurture, which is a much bigger, more entertainment, story-driven topic than... Is this about race? Is this about society and the different levels of people and wealth and stature in society? All those things are touched on, and all those things have some ways you can weave that into the story. But I walked away with a much simpler focus theme, which is nature versus nurture. Well, absolutely.
And without spoiling, I will agree that race is Get Out's thing.
Yeah.
I could see how you could see aspects of it, but it focuses more on, I think, to put it simply, the have and have-nots and nature versus nurture. And I can't get more into that without spoiling stuff.
I think we're going to have to spoil it because I think, I'm kind of at a bottleneck of what I can really refer to and talk about with things.
Okay, so...
Because everything I've got on the misgiving side pretty much depends on spoiling stuff.
Okay, well, then we've talked for about 20 minutes or so. So I guess if you don't want things spoiled, then skip ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at my notes, and pretty much everything else I've got to say is spoiler driven. So why don't we just ask everybody to skip ahead if they don't want to be spoiled in the film? We are going to spoil elements of Us. If you have not seen this film, or if you don't want to know these deals, you need to skip ahead. When you hear us talking about World War I,
then you'll know.
And Peter Jackson, you will know you've gone far enough ahead.
Yep.
Okay. And that's enough time, I think, break-wise.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, here's my thing. And this is going to make me talking for the next few minutes is going to make it sound like I didn't like this film. And that's the farthest thing from the truth. Okay. I really like this film. I wish I could say I loved it when I walked out of the theater. And it's mainly because of the way I feel like the last 20 minutes was handled. So I am being led to believe. Okay, so just for those of you who are listening and haven't seen the movie but don't care about being spoiled and you'd like to hear us spoil it. Okay, so the deal is we find out these doppelgangers, that it's not just this family, which I thought was an awesome reveal halfway through the film. I love the scene in the Elizabeth Moss and Tim Heidecker's their house, where we shockingly realize that, oh, nope, this is happening to everybody. It's not just this one family, which is what the trailers and everything else kind of lead you to believe. Is this just this family going through this? But we find out this is happening everywhere. Yes. And to a shocking degree, where one of my favorite scenes is we're inside the house and the two teenage daughters are up on the landing talking to their parents. And all of a sudden we look up and there's a doppelganger of the girls and brutally kills them.
Right.
And that's a moment where you're just like, okay, this whole movie has now just broadened out and gotten a lot more interesting for me, which is great. So we find out the doppelgangers are happening everywhere. And, what we learn, and this is where my issues happen. Okay, I'm totally with this film on it being I don't need to know how the doppelgangers got here. I don't need to know anything about them other than I love this concept of they are these shadow versions of ourselves.
Correct.
Because that's how they're first introduced. When Adeline is sitting with Red is her doppelganger. She kind of says, we're the shadows. We're the ones that kind of live in the darkness.
And that coded, now that we don't have to worry about spoilers, that coded speech that she gives, and we are spoiling it, people.
Oh, yeah. No, we're not holding anything back.
So in addition to there being doppelgangers of everyone, not just this one family, the other thing that happens in this film that we'll go ahead and spoil is that Adelaide, as a young child, goes to a fun house on a beach. She sees a double and freaks out. And then they flash forward all these years later, and you're like, okay, she's dealing with this trauma, and then she gets all freaked out when these people start coming up to her family, and she's like, oh, it's happening again. Okay, what they reveal to you at the end of the film is that, and actually, when I went back and watched the trailer last night, they actually show it in the trailer, which I was blown away by, because it's actually, I'd forgotten about that, but it's actually revealed at the end of the movie. When Adelaide meets her doppelganger, the doppelganger strangles her and knocks her out and drags her to it's kind of like an underground series of tunnels, which they actually put all this text up at the beginning of the movie, and you're like, okay, you don't really know what, but then it comes back into play later, like why that was important. But anyways, she basically knocks her out, takes her to this underworld, and then she goes back up, and she swaps shirts and all this kind of stuff, and she goes back up and blends in with her family. Yep. So at the end of the movie, you've learned that the doppelganger who you assume, who's dressed in a red suit and who you think is evil this whole time, she is actually the Adelaide from the beginning of the movie. Right. And she has been having to live underground and live in all these really like screwed up circumstances. Sure. Meanwhile, the person who was able to escape because she, strangled her, she's then had this family life. So it's this really
I thought it was a great
whole nature versus nurture thing.
I thought it was a great twist, and I love that environment. My whole issue is, and it all kind of comes down to one scene. It's really the scene where we have the Red explaining to Adeline down in the sewer, the underground world
dwellings, underground,
and
world,
basically lays out everything for her of what's gone on, and basically saying that they were basically almost like experiments. They were cloned. They were people that were made from existing people.
Right.
And they tried to do this experiment, but then they found out that even when they duplicated the person, it didn't duplicate the soul. So they lost so much of the soul in these people. So you have a bunch of people down in this underground world that can't talk, that don't have that same soul in them, that same desires of things. They're just there. They're almost like just aimless people in a way. It was just an odd setup. That was the moment where I said, all right, you as a director, Mr. Peele, making the decision to give me this specificity to the situation. Unfortunately for me, it opened up a whole lot more open plot holes and questions and issues that didn't work for me. I was totally fine with it being supernatural. I don't care where they came from. You just tell me they are shadow versions of people who have been living in the shadows, and like almost like our worst sides of us kind of come to light. And now they've come back to kind of take the rightful place in the world. I'm in. I'm totally in. I don't need to know anything more than that. Well, but the minute it becomes a clone experiment,
that's definitely a difference between you and I, because
it didn't work.
I think it would have worked if they hadn't put that out there at the end, but what that does to me is it takes it to a different level. It's set, for instance, the Alien franchise. Yep, they're just monsters running around. When Prometheus came out and it took the mythology and took things to a different level and kind of investigated what their whole purpose was and all that film, I've expressed my love for that movie. It made it even better. For some people, it disinterested them, opened up plot holes, and they didn't like it. Same thing for us. I liked the movie all along, and at the end, when she started basically kind of laying out what had happened and doesn't reveal, you don't know that they switched places until the very end of the movie. Yes. But at that point, when she's explaining kind of this underground, area of doppelganger / clones and everything, it just opened up questions, but those questions weren't bad for me. It was kind of, okay, the fact that these are now coming around and doing killings, it's in a way because they've been ignored, they've been forgotten about. Mankind decided to do this and then didn't take responsibility for it. And then they became the forgotten. And it's kind of like the Jurassic Park thing. Oh, we're going to go create a bunch of dinosaurs. Yay, this will be fun. Mm-hmm. And you don't realize what you're doing when you're playing God, and you don't realize what you're doing.
I love that idea.
So I
love that concept.
I appreciated it.
I love the concept. I love the idea. I love it being, again, I didn't even know what they meant by shadow versions of ourselves. Right. It could have been, maybe we did create them. Maybe they just somehow, I don't know. I was open to any interpretation on stuff. The problem for me just still comes down to when they say we cloned these people and then we forgot about them, but yet they've had kids, and those kids are exact mirror images of the kids above ground.
Right.
And I really didn't understand the idea of whether they were mirroring our actions, because they want you to believe at some parts of the film that they're underground mirroring what's happening above ground, like action wise. But then that didn't hold up when they decide to break free. They're not mirroring their other people anymore at all until the young boy does the scene where he walks backwards in the fire because he's mirroring his mirror. I'm like, okay, they're just being very inconsistent, which is, again, making it really difficult for this whole concept to kind of break down for me. It's like, I don't need everything spelled out specifically, but if you're going to give me specifics and say this is the way this world is, but then the rules of this world are very inconsistent, it's hard for me to grab onto what it is they're trying to convey with this. So anyway, I would have rather kept it as vague and as nebulous as possible. Then I didn't have to worry about the rules and think about this. But the minute they experimented, they created these people, and they left us down here, but yet they've basically generated exact kid copies, like somehow, even though this is now, so many years later. And do they mirror the actions of the people in the above world or not? Because if they do, then how? I don't know. It started me questioning way too much that I didn't want to be questioning. That's the thing, is I did not want to be questioning in this film. And I was so happy for the first 75% not to be questioning that stuff. And then when they did the thing, it was almost like a James Bond villain explaining everything in the classroom setting. And it's like, here's everything that's happening. At that point, I'm like, okay, all right, they kind of just derailed the film a little bit for me. And I didn't walk away with the same level of enjoyment because of that. So.
Yeah, that's not my experience at all. So that's an interesting. I think, if anything, what I was saying about, you can't help but compare just because he's only made 2 films, and they're both horror films. So Get Out versus Us, and that's the difference to me on why I enjoyed this film so much more than I did Get Out, was because Get Out, the premise was there about everything in that film, and it was kind of laid out at the beginning, and then nothing changed and nothing was elevated, and I was like, okay, that's that. Whereas with this film, you think it's one thing from the preview, and then you see, no, they're doppelgangers of everybody. Okay, they come back into and then things just keep kind of slowly tweaking, and then the very end tweak was like, yeah, we switched places. And the speech that you're saying, it elevated things for me. It didn't bring it down. And I guess the addition of questions for me was kind of a good thing. If anything, it probably just, because I started to kind of wonder, actually, at one point when you talked about Tim Heidecker and Elizabeth Moss, they're like this rich family that the Adelaide's family, at least the husband, is kind of competitive with a little bit. And there's where you get a little bit of the class and everything, but they're friends, but they're still a little bit kind of competitive. The siblings or the children of both families don't really it's kind of like they're put together, but they don't really necessarily get along. And there's some interesting things that they say back and forth. I don't know. And then there's so much there.
Well, see, and there again, that's also, to get back to kind of when I got to the end, it made me even look back earlier in the film and say, okay, now I don't understand the rules. I don't understand this world they've created. Some of the doppelgangers, like Red and her family, came and they invaded Adelaide's house and the family, and they basically held them hostage, or tried to, but they didn't kill any of them. They didn't seem that intent on wanting to murder them. They were wanting to just hold them or toy with them a little bit. But then you've got the ones who came to the white family, the Elizabeth Moss and Heidecker. And I mean, right away, it's like, oh, they showed up and they're straight out murdering him. And that's what's murdering everybody else.
I think the only reason that there again, it didn't bother me. Yeah. Doesn't bother me still. But if I was trying to excuse the behavior, it would be because there was that switch. Her family, and basically because she's with that family unit of doppelgangers, but she's a fake doppelganger, right. Adelaide is. It's like she wants to make sure the other ones realize what you've done and it's like she's trying to bring some type of. And
she was kind of deemed as the ringleader of this entire underworld,
right?
Kind of rising up against the people of the above world because she's the one who actually did live up there,
right?
And kind of is now seeing the horrors of what the people are downstairs
just the mirroring of the doppelganger gets to go up to the world because she traps Adelaide in the underworld with handcuffs, and which is what she does to her when they invade the home.
All that. No, it was great. I mean, believe me, and again, what I'm arguing about here is couple scenes and a few lines of dialogue that unfortunately for me, I didn't need. And I feel like actually overly complicated the film and made it to where I want to say, but now that doesn't make sense to me in these points. Yeah. Again, if I had not had that scene in the classroom, and honestly, it was just left very ambiguous why these shadow people were here and what they were doing down there and what I didn't need to know any of that.
Well,
I'm totally cool with that concept.
It's interesting because and I think it's just differences because I like things getting really complicated. I like that. It doesn't usually, in general, I like when things get complicated within movies. And actually, in the beginning of the movie where they showed the rabbits and then they showed something and then they just kind of went away and they show like all these cages of rats and then they just kind of go away and then they come back towards the end of the film and things make a little more sense. It actually bothered me because I kind of was like, okay, am I just going to turn my brain off? These are just zombie doppelganger. Oh, we're never going to get any. And they don't fully explain it. But the fact that I actually liked that it dumped a little bit more information in there because that way it made it more complicated and opened up plot holes for you, but didn't for me. But it actually kind of was like, okay, you're actually not just going to dangle the thing at the beginning and then just never come back and give it any more meat on the bones. They actually did try to fill it in a little bit more. But I can see how it opened up problems. So.
Well, it just calls me to question the world that they were trying to create. Because again, I didn't need any world building from this. I was very happy with what was going on, what they were doing, the story they were telling. But the minute they start doing some of that world building and there being some backstory and there being some reasons why they're down there, and now this is kind of what they go through and the whole mirroring thing again. And once that started to kind of come into play, it's like, all right, unfortunately, it just kind of broke down a little bit for me.
See, and I think that's kind of a summary for me is that I liked Get Out, but with Us, I realized Jordan Peele is somebody that I want to see anything he does because he was trying to build more of a world. It's not just a one-off. Hopefully, this is a one-off horror movie. Hopefully, he does not do Us 2.
Right.
And I'm glad he didn't do Get Out 2. He wants to create a world, wants to create an immersive story, but then it's like, I'm not doing this to set up a franchise. I'm doing this because I'm making this a standalone movie. And so I'm really excited to see what else he does. And also because he's kind of one of these people where he is a horror director, but I feel like in a way there's an association with horror with like schlock, because of how we grew up. It was just like, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise or the Freddy franchise, or Mike Myers and then, Jason, all that stuff. You just, in my mind at least, and I admit it's, that's biased. I just think, I don't like horror films. I'll only go see something if I feel like it's a well-crafted film. But, and so that just immediately excludes horror. But I think Jordan Peele is one of these people that is bent on making well-crafted films that just happen to fit in that horror genre. So it's like, okay, it's like The Witch and other films that we've talked about. Yeah. They can be horror films. It follows. And they're just well thought out. I
mean, yeah, absolutely. I see it as, and I think there's a reason why Jordan Peele is assigned to now kind of being a producer and the host of the new version of the Twilight Zone. Because that's the stories he loves. I mean, both of the movies he's made so far are basically feature-length Twilight Zone stories.
My only sadness is that I hope he doesn't just start doing TV now, because I would miss.
Oh no, I don't think
the
he's
immersive.
I don't think he's directing
versions.
and all that. I think he's just like lending as a producer, and he's hosting, which is not
Which
a
he'll
big.
probably do a really good job.
Yeah, I get the sense that he really wants to make more films. So
Okay.
I'm fine for that. Yeah, I did like this film better than Get Out. And again, I don't know, no excuse. I like this film a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun. I had a great time with it. I just, again, just had my misgivings with the way they handled the ending, or the lead up to the ending, I guess I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But I liked it better than Get Out because I felt like it just had more going on. And I thought it was more thrilling. It was scarier. It was just had a lot more craftsmanship to the film. But I also liked how Get Out was a little more localized into this certain group of people. When it broadens out to, we even have an ending shot of the film where it's the hands.
It's hands across
America.
America.
The doppelgangers doing the hands across America,
yeah.
truly across America, and it's helicopters are going off. You get the sense this is now a global situation.
At least
to deal
nationwide, but maybe global. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if that grandioseness of it worked for me in relation to the rest of the film.
And it did for me because it was
Yeah.
kind of like a 12 Monkeys type thing or Jurassic Park type thing. And that when I threw out, I kind of started to, but I had notions all along that maybe something was up, because when Adelaide is able to subdue people inside Tim Heidecker's house and stuff, she kind of gets this like snarl and stuff. I'm
yeah.
like, that's
I picked up on that
That's kind of
early
animalistic.
on.
Is she becoming, or was that the point that's saying like, all of us have this thing inside of us, and if you start killing things, you then lessen yourself and you become more like a doppelganger. It's like, oh, okay, maybe that's what they're doing. And then at the end, it's like, no, they were flipped and doppelgangers.
There was actually one scene where I honestly thought, did Red swap places then with Adelaide? Because Adelaide was acting she was quiet.
Right.
She was doing a lot more grunting and noises. And it's just, I thought, wow, did they switch?
Right.
How did they do that with the hair and all of that? But now looking at it at the end of the film, I'm like, well, yeah, that obviously made sense. There was a scene where her doppelganger daughter dies.
Right.
And she gets out of the car to go up and see that, even though there's absolutely no reason. Like every horror instinct tells you,
Don't get
you
out of the
have to
car.
keep driving. Don't go up
And the
there.
family says, don't get out of the car.
And of course, if you're not picking up on the twist, you're thinking, why is she doing this?
Right.
But now you look back in hindsight and you're like, well, yeah, because that's kind of in a way her daughter.
Right.
I mean, in a twisted way. I mean, it's who would have been her daughter if she had stayed down underground. So anyway,
And I think, and feeling guilt about, this is what I caused because I came up, and then they're kind of taking revenge. And do I feel bad for it because I basically stole this other person's life?
Yeah.
And I think in closing, like I said, the whole apocalyptic or, bring it on ourselves kind of Jurassic Park, 12 Monkeys type thing. That's where the Jeremiah 11:11 was interesting, because basically it says like, it was like, I'm going to put like basically bring an apocalypse on this area because these people, and they'll not be able to survive it. And it's basically like, because they've done all these bad things, kind of like a Sodom and Gomorrah type thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to put all this, bad stuff happening, and you won't be able to get out of it. And it's kind of like humans, you assume at some point, the above world, like they say, created the doppelgangers and then just said, oh, yeah, they don't have souls or whatever. Okay, and now we're just going to forget about them. And like, nope, it's responsibility, and eventually that's going to come back and haunt you.
and there again, that's the only theme I needed out of the film. That totally worked. That's it. That was all. I mean, what you just described there, perfect. I get it. I think when I've just read too many online reviews or other people, critics, trying to weave in politics and race and other things into it, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, if you really wanted to reach for those things, there's threads to grab onto there,
Right.
but I don't see all that. I don't, and I choose not to see that. I see the theme you were just talking about.
Right.
Again, I would have been very happy if it was just the darker sides of our own self, our own shadow versions, and that there's a lot of evilness or things that we all push aside and don't want to deal with, and now these are kind of manifested. I thought that's where they were going, and I was cool with that. And then hearing Experiment and their people we left behind, I'm still okay with that. Then they just start trying to weave in the whole mirroring and the whole thinking about how the kids replicated in the exact same way they did above ground, even though they weren't clones themselves. They were kids of the clones, but yet they turned out exactly like the ones up top. Little things like that. Just that's where it started to break down for me. That's it. So again,
Interesting.
I think they could have scaled back. Yeah, I think we did more of talk longer in spoiler time
Spoilers
than we did in the original review. So
Could be.
let's go ahead and hop out of this review and move on. Overall, you and I both like it.
Yep.
You seem to like it a little more than me, mainly because I've just got some misgivings with a part of the film. But overall, otherwise, I'm very high on this film. I liked it. I had a really great time with it. And sounds like you absolutely did as well.
I
So
do as well, yeah.
All right. So
Big
we're
on it.
both heavily recommending. Just, I will say the biggest thing about this film I love is the fact that it does generate conversations, which I am always a fan of. I don't want
Agreed.
anything to just lay out there and be not worth talking about afterwards. So I'm definitely happy about that part of it. Okay. So welcome back if you skipped ahead, sounding the alarm, letting you know we are done talking spoilers. So we are going to move on to our second review, which is the film They Shall Not Grow Old.
I was 16 years old and my father allowed me to go.
I was just turned 17 at the time.
I was 16. I was 15 years.
When they came to us, they were frightened children and had to be made into soldiers.
All right, boys, here it comes. We're in the pictures.
I gave every part of my youth to do a job.
Chris, with They Shall Not Grow Old, director and producer Peter Jackson, which is really the main person credited with this. It seemed to be his idea, it seemed to be his thing to move forward with. He spends a lot of time working on restoring and bringing back to life World War I footage, which is interesting because I think we even talked about in our discussion after the film screening the other night we had of this film, that World War I is a war that we just don't really talk a lot about as a society. It's World War II. That's the big one everybody focuses on.
And countless movies have been made.
Oh, absolutely. But World War I's doesn't have as much attention in media, not as much attention, I think, in history books. You know, it's not really revered as much as the Second World War. But yet, Peter Jackson had a grandfather who fought in World War I and spent a lot of time taking footage, black and white footage, old hand-cranked footage where the timing's off and there's no sound to it, and figuring out a way to restore it so we actually, for the first time ever, have a more realistic view of what life might have been like in the war for the soldiers. So taking over 100 hours of footage and restoring, taking over 600 hours of audio interviews with veterans of World War I and crafting it into a documentary called They Shall Not Grow Old. So Chris, in looking at this, it's tough sometimes to review a documentary like this because I don't want to say it's pretty straightforward, but you know, it had a singular purpose to restore this footage and give us this very visual inside look on the soldiers in World War I. And it did that through a combination of all the audio interview clips we hear and the restored footage, as well as some old footage that's not restored.
Right.
It's tough to review it because, you know, you got to look at it both from a how did it work as a film and then also how did it work from a technical standpoint. Mm-hmm. And I do think there's two different arguments to make here.
Sure.
So let me pose those two arguments for you. Tell me what you thought of it as a film and what you thought of it as a technical spectacle. Okay, because I do think there's two different minds of those. I'd like to hear your thoughts on
which do
that.
I have to do first?
Either one, whichever you feel like.
Because, for fear of being portrayed the bad guy. Which tips my hand. From a technical aspect, yeah, it was amazing what he did, the amount of time that it had to take to, okay, first you've got to restore the footage, all the stuff that makes jumps or all the little specks on the film. And, this stuff's really old by now. Okay, you just restore it so you can actually see what's going on. And then on top of that, they then add in, they colorize it. And then on top of that, they also add in sound so that it's like you feel like you hear the moving of the tanks and it matches up perfectly. So it's as if they were recording sound when they were recording this footage, which they weren't.
Yeah, right.
So all of that put together worked from a technical aspect and was more allowed me to more submerge myself into what I think they were trying to do, which was give you a feeling of World War I. Mm-hmm. Now you're saying from the film perspective,
how did it work as a film?
And so I'll say for that's something that I can say positively about that aspect was it did make me feel like I I got a sense of the trench warfare and what it was like to be in the trenches. You see things for what it was like to be a fighter pilot, or what it was like to be on the ground, like through things like Saving Private Ryan when they were, storming the beaches and that type. But that's all World War II. This is World War I, and they gave you a little bit of a feeling of how people weren't really understanding that they were getting into war, and it was like, hey, we're going to be employed. Awesome. Through some of the beginning things that happened, you heard voiceovers of people being very naive about war, and then getting into it, and then kind of seeing what happens. And there again, as I mentioned, the shots of people in the trenches, and you see a lot of dead bodies as you do in war. And that did hit home. But overall, as a film and as a documentary, it did leave me a little cold, I guess.
Right.
I felt like I did learn a little bit about World War I, but to me it felt more of like a expressionistic or experimental documentary.
Yeah.
As opposed to one that was providing me facts, or one that was providing me a little bit more knowledge. It was, and I appreciated that, but I think it kind of surprised me because I felt like I would get a little bit more of factual things. And it's still worth seeing for anybody who's a big history buff. But I was kind of surprised that after the technical stuff was done, the film side, or the experience as a whole piece, didn't really hold up for me as well as I thought.
I think you and I are similar in our thoughts here. I was amazed technically with the film, because and I'll say this, that the film does have a portion that is not the restored footage, and that goes on for a while at the beginning, and then when it shifts to the restored footage, it is pretty amazing, and it definitely does, like, you really are kind of entranced with it for a while. I think, but I agree with you that it just didn't work as a film for me.
Yeah.
I almost felt like it's one of those things where you go to a museum and you walk into an environment where maybe there's video screens up and they kind of put you in the feel of it, and you watch like little montages and vignettes of things.
Sure.
It totally was good for that environment. But you're right. I think the problem with the film was, I think it was really long.
It was.
For not doing as much varied things within that time. I mean, it wasn't that it was a long film. It was an hour, 35 minutes. But for probably half the film, it was very repetitive in that it was in the battles. Let's just show a lot of battle shots, which again, and there was a whole sequence that was all just hand-drawn illustrations of battle. And it seemed to be just kind of mulling over the same points for really, really long periods of time.
Yeah.
So I honestly think you could have boiled this down and got it down to 30, 45 minutes, and it would have been very effective in giving you that feeling of what it's to be like, and hear the thoughts of what soldiers were feeling at the time. But if you're not going to put in more personalities and facts and getting to know people and getting to know the situation around them, to watch this for an hour, 40 minutes was it got to be kind of grueling after a while. It was kind of more of an endurance test after a while.
So. War is grueling, obviously.
Yeah, but I'm saying more endurance, just, okay, we're still watching the same kind of footage over and over again, and I don't know. I don't want to discredit the technical side of it because it was amazing, and I definitely know what they were trying to do. Peter Jackson, even in interviews, has said, I didn't want to add people's names or dates or specifics because I wanted this to be more about just the general soldier experience. But an hour and 40 minutes of just that general soldier experience, and it just kind of all bleed together, it just didn't make a compelling experience for me.
And we are exactly on the same page, and not a compelling experience because I can appreciate the generalization, like you were saying, Peter Jackson was going for. But because of that, you don't have any narrative thread to hang your hat on, or you don't have any factual threads because without names and dates and stuff like that, you're kind of just floating.
Yeah.
Interesting. I had not thought about it from the context of what you would see when you go to a museum. But I think this film, if put into a World War I museum and then kind of done in vignettes, like in different stages or different rooms of the museum or whatever, or just different films that you watch in between, walking between rooms, that would be amazing. It would be so good. And it would be more impactful because it would give you a little bit more of context, I think. Yeah. So, I think that's it's not that this film's not good, not that it has a purpose, and the restoration and all the hard work that went into it. It's just the venue of watching an hour and 30 minutes all in one sitting, I feel like isn't really doing it justice.
That's why when I was watching this, I said, how great would it be if you were at a World War I museum and room one was
before you
recruitment,
go to war.
recruitment, and it's just a whole 5-10 minutes about the recruitment. Okay,
Agreed.
and then you got the facts, you got other things around the exhibit you can read, and then you go on to say, all right, now we actually get on the ground, and then there's a whole section on the battle, and that to me would have been really fascinating because then you supplement it with other facts and pictures and notes and all that. You're right. Watching it for an hour and a half, it just to me didn't work as a documentary style format, long form documentary format.
Something you and I talk about a lot on the show, I know I do ad nauseum, are expectations. And I thought it was interesting with this film how it actually played with my expectations because as you mentioned, everybody, if you've seen a trailer for this film, if you've seen the poster for this film, the whole thing is, hey, we restored stuff and it looks pretty cool. So when the film starts, it's, they kind of do a little bit of a bookend and the film starts and it's black and white. You're like, okay, well, it's black and white and it's the herky-jerky footage. It's kind of hard to see. But that's going to go away in 2 or 3 minutes because the whole point of this thing was to see restored footage. And we keep going and we keep going. And that doesn't happen. Now, I don't know when it happens, but I felt like it was a good maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
I think it was closer to 20 minutes.
Okay. And I admit, I was getting restless and irritated because I'm kind of like, I've seen this stuff before. You're not showing me anything new. I'm not learning any new facts. So what gives? Well, then I feel like the transition to the restored footage basically happened when the battle started, when you got to the trenches. And then it ends because, like I was mentioning, there's a bookend. It kind of ends when the battle's over and things are winding up before the going home journey and before the aftermath of World War I was talked about. Then it reverts back to black and white. So after it was all said and done, even though it was a little fidgety at the beginning, I can appreciate it because in a way, like you were saying, they talked about the hype to all the soldiers before they went off to war and they were all excited. And they kept it old school. But then once the reality of the war set in, that's when the reality of the restored footage was used.
Well, I like the framing of
so
it
the
all.
framing,
I thought the framing was good.
The framing worked, and I was confused.
I wish it wasn't 20 minutes of that of the non-restored footage at the beginning because it really did take a sweet time getting there.
Sure.
But I love the way it did wrap up. When it comes back from war, it fades back to the black and white, and then it's just a slowly kind of shrinking old footage down to like it was aspect ratio. And it was the right amount of time. It was maybe 5 minutes at the end going in.
You just needed
the
that
old stuff. Perfect.
Similarly at the beginning.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think my whole issue was just the structure, length, and the overall format of presenting it in this kind of film. It's not at all issues with what they did. It's just more the issues with the way they chose to present it in a singular story like this.
Something that you mentioned in our discussion that was held after the film for our society members that I want to be sure to touch on here because I had kind of a problem with it. After you explained it, I understood why they did it a little more. But the fact that they didn't explain it in the film, it just made it just really weird. It's the use of some of the illustrations and the use of things. And it was just kind of like you just saw really extreme close-ups, and I was like, I don't get that, And I felt like it added length and added time to stuff I didn't really need. And then you said after the discussion, correct me if I get the specifics wrong, but you said these were actual drawings that were done back during that time period, and they wanted to use things to help show some of the battle because, some of the things they can't show because there wasn't footage of it, but they wanted to give you those ideas. And the reason it was kind of weird was because they would zoom them up and crop them out so that you didn't see depictions of the Germans. You just saw depictions of the British soldiers because they were depicting them in a very propaganda type way. They didn't want to focus on that. They just wanted to focus on the British experience.
Well, and also the interviews that we are hearing during the film are talking about from the British soldiers, talking about how the Germans were really excellent soldiers and very good fighters and, all these things intimidating and all. But the propaganda drawings all showed the Germans as weak and foolish and just kind of, so they didn't want to show that part of the drawing. So they were focusing on just the British part of the drawings. That was probably my biggest issue with the film is I just felt like that middle section of the fighting from primarily illustrations that we're seeing, it just was really long. It just didn't fit the rest of the film. I get that they didn't have any actual footage of people out there fighting. So they had to kind of show that part of the story in a certain way. But I would have been okay with them saying, they're running off into the battle. And then we come back to the footage after the battle's done.
Of all the carnage.
And we see all the carnage afterwards, and we get a sense of how disastrous it was and bloody it was. I'm okay with that. I don't need to see a 10-minute montage of fighting through illustrations because I know what that looks like. I can visualize that. And we don't have the footage to show it anyway. So why try to cover that up, And
I agree. I think that would have helped with running time. And it was also it was frustrating for me. You explained afterwards kind of why they did it.
There was a reason for it, but it still didn't. I don't think that whole section needed to be there. It didn't add anything to it at all.
Likewise, I'll say something that didn't add anything to me and really irritated me because I thought it was something that looked very amateurish and like something you would do in the 1980s. Yeah. At the beginning, when the footage was black and white, before they transitioned, they showed some kind of like propaganda posters type things again. And the propaganda posters were in color. And then they would kind of inset some black and white footage playing over it, like in small little windows. And it would go. And I was just like, I don't know what you're trying to do here. Other than maybe put some color on the screen so I'm not irritated it's black and white. I felt like that was kind of clumsily handled.
Clumsy, I think, is probably a good word to use with the film. Technically incredible. Made into a film clumsy. It just didn't fit the format the way I was hoping it would. Again, I pulled back up this footage on my own computer and watched some of it because I think it's amazing what they did with the restored footage. I just don't care to see it as a feature-length documentary format anymore. I just don't think that format works for telling the story the right way. So, all right. Well, it sounds like we're on the same page with this. So, They Shall Not Grow Old. I think technically people should check it out if they are history buffs, if they're interested in World War I, or just wanting to see really interesting filmmaking techniques with footage of what they're doing with it.
Right.
But it's not something I don't even feel like it's something somebody needs to make a plan to like spend an hour and 40 minutes sitting down watching it. I think you can get a really great sense of it, of like watching it at your own leisure in parts, and kind of just getting a sense of what the film does, but don't go into it looking for a complete story and kind of an engaging hour and 40-minute progression of that story. It's a museum highlight reel. And if you look at it that way, then I think it's an impressive watch.
And if you're a giant history buff who's really interested in World War I, then you probably will find more gratification in watching it because you already know a lot of the details. But otherwise.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I will say They Shall Not Grow Old. It's available online now. At least it was in a purchase format. I'm sure it's available for rent, I think, in May. Again, there are certain reasons to watch this film and certain reasons to appreciate it. So we're not advocating it. It's just it's a difficult format to try to come across in, and just be prepared for that if you do end up seeing it. So that's They Shall Not Grow Old by Peter Jackson, and it is available online as we speak right now. So, Chris, that's our 2 reviews. We're going to go into a quick break, and when we come back, we've got some 3 new news items we're going to share with the audience and talk about between us, and then we'll end the show with each of us giving our recommendation for the episode. So, stay tuned. You're listening to Footcandle Films here on themesh.tv. We'll be right back.
This podcast is sponsored by the 2019 Footcandle Film Festival. This year's festival will be held September 27th through the 29th in Hickory, North Carolina. Learn more by visiting footcandlefilmfestival.com. Welcome back to Footcandle Films here on themesh.tv. Chris and I had our lively conversation about the film Us, and then a conversation about the film They Shall Not Grow Old. In the first half of the show. Now we're moving on to our movie news and our recommendations. But before we jump into that, just a quick reminder, we do have a film festival coming up in September. So I want to make sure you know about that. We'll give you a little more details at the end of the show, but just please have on your calendar September 27th through the 29th of 2019 will be our 5th annual Footcandle Film Festival. Then also, you are listening to this show on themesh.tv. We encourage you to check us out online. The network website is themesh.tv, THEMESH.tv. You can check out back episodes of this show, subscribe through whatever format or platform you choose to use, and also check out other shows we have on the Mesh Network for your listening enjoyment. All right, so Chris, let's get into some movie news. I've got a couple items. I know you've got one, so if it's okay, let me hop in first and do the first one I've got listed. So I stay up to date with a lot of film projects, and I like to read up on like who's working on what films and what's happening, and especially when there's big name directors or big name stars attached to them.
Okay.
So per Variety online in the magazine and
Sure.
Variety. Per exclusive with them, so I want to give them credit for this. I just read this today, and
breaking news.
And the whole there are so many interesting tidbits in just this title of this announcement. The announcement was Tom Hanks
I've heard of him
to play Colonel Tom Parker in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis biopic.
Oh, okay.
So
I couldn't place the Colonel. I mean, I was like, Colonel, that sounds.
So there's several pieces about this that are intriguing. A, they're making an Elvis biopic. It just dawned on me that I don't think
bizarre.
we've had one.
To my knowledge, definitely that one that hasn't come out in our lifetime.
I think there's been one like a TV miniseries.
movies and stuff,
but not a movie.
But there's never,
which is really odd because you would think that would be one that they would have explored by now. 2, Baz Luhrmann, Moulin Rouge,
right?
Romeo and Juliet,
right?
He's doing the Elvis biopic.
Australia, which was not good with Hugh Jackman.
Well, yeah, that too. And then you've got Tom Hanks playing Colonel Tom Parker. Now, supposedly in the film, they're pretty adamant about Elvis is going to be a newcomer. So they're not going to have a big star play Elvis. It's going to be somebody you've never seen before, which I think is the right way to go.
Although I got excited because didn't Jack White play Elvis in Walk Hard?
Oh, I think he did, yeah.
So I got excited there for a second. I was like, wait.
But I'm sure they're going to need somebody who can play Elvis at the younger years and then play him older too. But I love the fact that, Tom Hanks playing Colonel Tom Parker. Obviously, Tom Parker was kind of his manager from back in the early days through most of his career and was really responsible for a lot of his how big he got over time.
So I guess is the focus going to be more on, since Tom Hanks is a big name, is it going to be kind of like, here's Elvis and you watch that, but it's kind of through the lens of
maybe,
Colonel
I don't know.
Parker.
Well, of course, the fact Baz Luhrmann, a very kinetic director with a lot of visual style to it.
Yeah.
Music is a big thing in his film, so obviously music playing in the biopic. The whole thing has got me really curious, and I didn't know anything about this project until I read this one headline today.
That's interesting.
I thought it was really, really cool. If you told me they were making an Elvis biopic, I'd be like, okay, I'll wait and see who's involved.
Sure.
Baz Luhrmann's doing it? Okay. I'm very curious. A curious choice, but I'm intrigued. And, I think Tom Hanks is still a very, very high caliber actor that doesn't really do a lot of junk. And so for him to sign on to play what could be a supporting role, I think is a good sign too. So
yeah, that is odd and interesting. Odd that. Yeah, just there's a lot odd about that, but yeah, I'm curious too.
Yeah, I'm very curious.
Is there? I'm guessing it's probably like a 2020 release.
At least, I think they're just now signing up actors for it, so gotcha. I'm sure it'll be at least 2020, if possibly not even early 2021. I would imagine at this point.
Gotcha.
So that was my first news item. Kind of an interesting surprise when I read that.
Absolutely,
Chris, what do you have to share with us here?
So it happened as of today when we're recording. It's been announced Agnes Varda has passed away. We reviewed her film Faces Places like in 2017. It was a documentary. But if you didn't listen to that episode or you're not familiar, she's a famed Belgian-born French filmmaker, and she is pretty much one of the contributors to the French New Wave cinema movement. And, she was well thought of. She made some fiction narrative films, but a lot of what she did were documentaries. Yeah. And a lot of times she was in them. Her last film, which she stated at the time when it came out, excuse me, she said, this will be my last film. It came out earlier this year, and it was a documentary called Varda by Agnes. I didn't see it, but now I really want to see it.
Right.
I think if I remember back to our discussion of Faces Places, you and I both liked it.
Yeah, we did. It was a nice, pleasant film that was somewhat simple, but I think done with a great style and charm to it. So yeah,
and I said at the time, I think I remember after our review, like I wanted to check out some of her other work. And I haven't.
Yeah,
so I think
either.
I'm going to have to use it. Actually, I want to check out her last film just because I want to, but then I want to go back and also see one of her narratives because the last film is a documentary. So I think I Unfortunately, with her passing, it just kind of reminds me like, hey, here's this big person in cinema that
a big body of work we need to get more familiar with. Well, and the fact is she was making movies from like 1955 upward, and she's 90 years old.
She was 90 years old.
So she has definitely had a huge long career in film. And again, like you said, a lot of impact on French New Wave and just even documentary cinema as we know it today. I think she's been a real a shaper of that.
Well, so. What kind of interested me so much about her in Faces Places, and upon seeing the remembrances of her online today, the way people talk about her as a person, being this kind person who was just, had this interesting view of life and just this personality. It kind of made me think like she's the Dumbledore of the French New Wave, kind of a twinkle in her eye. She has this like kind of whimsical sense about her. Like
I can see that.
Her haircut for the last 15 years, she was like gray on top and then this like purple band of color. It was like she was just her own person. She marched to whatever drummer she happened to hear, and I know something about that idea I really respond to. So
Agreed.
Sad to see her pass, but I want to check out more of her work.
I appreciate you bringing that up. And of course, thoughts and prayers to friends, family, and all. But definitely a loss for cinema. And the fact is, even though she was 90, she was making movies in the last couple of years here. So she was still a contributor that we're sorely going to miss there. I've got one more news item.
Okay.
Yet another interesting project for a couple of different reasons that I read about recently, and I didn't know if you knew anything about it. So someone is working on a new adaptation of Macbeth.
Oh.
Do you know who that is?
No.
Okay. So here's the thing that's interesting. There is a new adaptation of Macbeth. They've signed on the two lead actors to play the Lord and his wife. Denzel Washington will be playing Lord Macbeth.
Okay.
Frances McDormand will be playing his wife.
Whoa.
Now.
So Lady Macbeth. Okay.
Yeah. Now let me get to the really interesting part of this. It is being directed by a certain Joel Cohen.
Okay.
Not Ethan. This is the first film that they've not worked together on.
Which one is Frances McDormand married to?
Not sure.
Okay.
But this is Joel Cohen's directing from his own original script and shooting before the end of the year. And this will mark the first film without his directing, writing, and producing partner and brother, Ethan.
I'm going to say that Joel is the one married to Frances McDormand. Totally making this up, and Google, you could prove us wrong. But
yeah, but there again, when I read that it's not with his partner. Okay, so that's unique in its own standpoint that they've not directed something separate from each other. So Joel doing an original script of Macbeth. And then you land Denzel Washington and, of course, Frances McDormand.
Okay. Thank you, Google. Yes, Frances McDormand is married to Joel.
So this may be a little bit of a pet project for him. But there again, if you go for 30 plus years and you're directing alongside your brother on everything, they share credit. They never split it out. It's kind of interesting. So it to be Macbeth, too, which is not something I would have expected the Coens, either of them, to really explore into.
I wonder, and who knows, who knows how the brothers work.
Yeah.
You and I both enjoy their work. But I wonder if it's because it's such a, and they both share writing credit and directing credit. But I'm wondering if because technically, Macbeth has been done dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times, both film, on stage, people have tweaked it to be modern, whatever. So I wonder if because there was so, I don't want to say little to do script wise, but basically the meat's there, like the story's there. So I wonder if it was just kind of like Ethan's like, you know what? That's awesome.
It's all you, man.
That's awesome. But why don't you do it? Because you're totally like, it's like, I don't think you need my help, or I don't think we will. I don't think there's room for two of us. Like, I'll go work on our next script or something. Like,
it could be that, or it could just be the fact that it's a to do something very out of sorts for the Coen brothers in general. Maybe it truly is a real passion project for Joel, and Ethan just didn't really have that same passion for it because this is not typically the kind of film they've worked on together.
Sure.
So I don't know.
That is interesting.
The little sarcastic part of me could say, so this will be an interesting way for us to find out which of the Coen brothers is really the better director. Because if the movie's horrible, it's like, well, that tells us something.
Or which of the brothers is the better screenwriter.
Yeah, that too. Because supposedly I've always heard that with the films, one of them kind of takes more of the lead in each film. Okay. But we don't really know which one because they're labeled as both directors and both writers all the time.
Right, sure.
But I've always heard one kind of takes more of the lead in each film than the other. They just have an agreement to kind of always be together on these credits. But this is the first time that it's really just one. So it is going to be kind of interesting to see how does a single Coen brother do when not supported or co-listed with the brother. So
yeah, that's interesting.
I thought so too. Very interesting news today. Okay, so that's our news items. Chris, let's go ahead and try to wrap up the show with our recommendations. And again, just as a reminder, this is where Chris and I both feature one film that we want to recommend for whatever reason. But normally it's something where we've either had a chance to catch up with a film that maybe we missed when it first came out, is available online. Maybe it's one that went straight to online. Maybe it's one that just maybe we didn't feel like got a lot of buzz when it came out, or it could be any of those reasons. So, Chris, if it's okay with you, let me go ahead and jump in first, if that's all right. I'm going to go ahead and do mine first, and you can end it up for us.
Okay.
My recommendation, I'm recommending for very specific reasons. I'm not going to say that the film as a whole completely works, but I do think there's some elements of the film that are worth seeing, especially for people who may be in certain stages of their life or have experiences with other things going on around them. The film is Beautiful Boy. This is a film that was just from last year. It stars Steve Carell and Timothée Chalamet. And it is a very realistic portrayal of a son going through drug addiction.
Okay.
And the reason I'm recommending it is a couple reasons. One, Timothée Chalamet is really good in this.
Okay.
I do think, he got I don't think he got Oscar nominated. I don't remember.
For a Beautiful Boy?
For a Beautiful Boy.
He did not.
But he got a lot of other nominations and other award ceremonies, and I think well warranted. It's kind of scary how good he is playing this part of a young boy that, you see him from going from teenage years to like college age years, but he doesn't go to college. Okay. He falls into a drug addiction lifestyle. And it's pretty harrowing. I mean, he's really good in this and plays the part extremely well. I'm also recommending the film because I think it's probably one of the more realistic portrayals we've seen in film of true drug addiction.
Okay.
Where we're watching it from the standpoint of the father, and the father who feels both helpless, in all honesty, at points is kind of enabling it, or enabling his dependency anyway.
Okay.
And you feel for what they're going through. There's no easy answers. There's no quick solution. There's a lot of frustration as a viewer because you keep seeing these cycles of the same thing happening between the son and the father. But yet that's how it happens a lot of times. I mean, it's not we send him off to rehab and he'll get fixed and he comes back and everything's great. Nope, that's not the way it works. And that's not the way it happened here in the film either. So the film didn't stray away from showing us truly how frustrating and upsetting and scary the whole situation is. Now, I will say it's not a great film in that they do some stylistic choices with storytelling and playing with time that just do not work. It actually complicates things a lot more than it needs to be. There's so many times I've found myself not really knowing what time period we're looking at and what the sequence of things are, because it does make a difference in the story, but the storytelling was really haphazard and just didn't really work as well. And I think Steve Carell might have been a little miscast for this. I think I like him as an actor. Sure. And when he has roles that touch on dramatic roles, I think he does really well. But this is a full-on, no comedy, nothing light, pure dramatic role. And I just don't think he's quite built for that. So it didn't work for me as well, his role in this. But I'm going to say, I think for Timothée Chalamet, for just someone who, I hate saying this, but anybody who may be going through some of their own situations where children or family members are having drug addiction issues, or even people or going through some really tough times working with your kids, especially the kids as they become going into adulthood and you're worried about their future and what's ahead of them. This is a tough watch, but I think it's probably one of the more realistic portrayals I've seen of what some parents are actually dealing with and going through in this. So
Again, I'm recommending with caveats.
Sure.
I don't think it's a great film. I think it had some real issues in the pacing and storytelling side of it. But for the portrayal and for some of the messages it's trying to share and showing you a very accurate portrayal, I think it's really strong in those aspects. So anyway, that's Beautiful Boy. It's available on Amazon Prime. So if you are an Amazon Prime member, you get it for free. Otherwise, you can rent it on iTunes or Amazon or anywhere else. So, Chris, what do you have to recommend for us here?
So I'm going to recommend the latest film by Craig Zoller, and he made another film called Bone Tomahawk, which I believe I recommended.
You did?
A couple of episodes
back.
back.
I remember that.
So this is his latest film. It played at a couple of festivals and then was released directly to online. So it's available Amazon, iTunes, the usual places as well. So it didn't get a theatrical release in the U.S. that I'm aware of, but it just was released March 22nd.
All right.
Read you a quick plot description. 2 policemen, one an old-timer, the other his volatile younger partner, find themselves suspended when a video of their strong-arm tactics becomes the media's cause du jour. Low on cash and with no other options, these 2 embittered soldiers descend into the criminal underworld to gain their just due, but instead find far more than they wanted awaiting them in the shadows. So, it's like a crime film, which, he's done. He did a prison movie. He's done a Western. Now it's like a noir type film. Now, what is interesting to me are the 2 actors that he has as the 2 policemen, Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn.
Ooh.
So kind of an odd pairing. Apparently they have worked together. They were in Hacksaw Ridge, which Gibson directed from a couple of years ago.
Oh, that's true.
He wasn't, Gibson wasn't in it.
But they haven't acted together.
So. Vaughn, right.
But that's an interesting pairing. I actually, the more I think about it, that's a fascinating pairing of actors.
Yeah. And it's interesting. They have a good chemistry together on screen. And it's a reminder, he's had, well-publicized missteps in the public eye. Mel Gibson has. Still a good actor. So it's really interesting. This is, I will also give the disclaimer since you gave some with yours. This is a very tough film. It is dark. There is some humor in it, but, overall, it's very dark. It's very violent. Apparently, Zoller makes kind of violent films.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think all the films he's made so far have been pretty harsh
tough
on the violence side.
But to me, it was an interesting investigation of, crime and how it doesn't really say good guys, bad guys. It's like people trying to do the best they can, making some bad choices, but just, it consistently surprised you. There were twists that kept happening, and you kind of think, okay, yeah, this is how the rest of this movie is going to go, and nope, it would change, and then it would change again.
Well, I like that though.
Yeah. And I'll also say, because I've complained often, it's 159 minutes, which is long.
Wow, yeah.
But to me, it didn't feel that long. It really moved, and it's not. I would think people would think, oh, it's like an action movie. It's not. It's a lot of dialogue and a lot of things just kind of playing out. So, don't go expecting like a huge action film, with explosions and everything. But it's good. It's of the genre. It's one of my favorite films of that type to come out in a while. Actually, when you and I discussed Widows, I remember feeling like I wanted a little more or something with that film. And even though this is a different type of film, it still was kind of more what I thought I was going to get out of Widows, if that makes any sense. But the film, Dragged Across Concrete.
Across Concrete.
Kind of lets you give a little bit of how it's going to be very gritty.
Not one for the kids.
No, definitely an R. But Dragged Across Concrete, it's really well made. And what I'm interested to see, too, is this guy now has 3 films under his belt. I'm wondering if this one's going to kind of get him the groundswell of support or whatever, that his next film will actually be one for the theaters. Because honestly, he's kind of like a newer version of Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino would jump around between genres and kind of put his own spin on the Western, or put his own spin on the crime drama, or put his own spin on a World War II movie. And this guy's kind of done the same thing, where he did Western prison movie. Now he's done like a, thriller police drama thing. So I'm curious to see what he would do next, but he definitely has a style, and I'm interested to see how that plays out in his career in the next films he does.
No, that's interesting. I was just actually looking up him and kind of his filmography. I'm curious if he's working on anything else right now, coming up, and like what type of film it would be.
I would love for him to do a science fiction film because that would be yet another genre that, I think would be interesting. It would definitely be a unique take on the genre. He also tends to like relatively long running times.
Well, I was going to say, the films have generally been long. This one's 2 hours and 39 minutes. But as far as other projects he's working on, it looks like right now, director-wise, doesn't have another one listed coming up. So that's the 3, Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, and now Dragged Across Concrete. But he has written 5 films.
Okay.
The 3, obviously, he directed, but he also wrote a film called Asylum Blackout in 2011 and Puppet Master, The Littlest Reich in 2018.
Whoa.
Yeah. So just like this past year, he wrote that. Now, he may have been one of the writers, maybe not the only writer. Yeah, there's 2 writers assigned to it, but still.
Okay.
That was an interesting mix there.
That is.
But as far as director, he has just done these 3 and but doesn't have any future projects listed, as far as on IMDb or anything. So I don't know what he's working on next, but very, very interesting. Okay, well, thanks for the recommendation. That may be one I have to check out even this weekend. Who knows? So that is our show. So we had our reviews of Us and They Shall Not Grow Old. We did some movie news items about the latest from Joel Cohn. Still odd to say that.
I know.
And we talked about Agnes Varda's passing and kind of a little remembrance of that. We also talked about the very interesting Elvis biopic that's being made that we're curious about now. And then our recommendations, Dragged Across Concrete, and mine was Beautiful Boy. Also, I'll mention with Beautiful Boy, great music. The music's really good in it. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show. Chris, I'm sure people will have some opinions about some of the reviews we gave.
Likely.
So if so, how do you recommend they go about getting a hold of us to share those opinions?
You can send us an email at info@themesh.tv and mention Footcandle Films in the subject line. And yes, share us your opinions. Also, if you happen to be on that service called iTunes and you're looking up our podcast, if you haven't already subscribed, that would be great. Also, if you could give us a star rating, or even better, a star rating, and leave some comments about hopefully how you like the show, that helps us reach more listeners.
Yeah, and it's actually a good point. I should say from a technical standpoint, if you're someone who had subscribed to the show in the past, and maybe you're listening to the show now through our website or somewhere else, and maybe you're not getting the subscription, we do need you to go and subscribe to the show again. And we're not doing that just to build our numbers. We honestly had to kind of reset subscriptions when we did some changes with the network. Unfortunately, it's not what we wanted. But if you are not a current subscriber to the show, but you have been in the past and maybe you thought something was going wrong, if you can go find us on iTunes or Stitcher Radio or anywhere else, mainly iTunes is where I think the break happened. We'd love for you to resubscribe again so we can get you and make sure you get all the new episodes going forward as well. So thanks for doing that in advance. All right, well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap everything up, and we will look forward to having another episode out soon in the coming weeks as we review both some new films and talk about some other films we want to recommend for you. So for Footcandle Films, I'm Alan, and we'll talk to you next time.
See you in the ticket line.
And that's Chris.
Special thanks to Carpal Tuller for the show theme music. For more about Carpal Tuller, visit www.carpaltuller.com. You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.